I stepped out of gallbladder surgery to find a locksmith already at my restaurant, changing every door on my brother-in-law's orders, because he'd told the staff I was stepping back from ownership. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to anything. 24 hours later, the same man who smiled while handing my keys to a stranger was sitting across from a state investigator, watching me lay out the filing that proved the restaurant had never belonged to him at all. My name is Priya Anand. I'm 36, and for 8 years I built a small Indian bistro called Saffron Table, from a single rented storefront into a place with a wait list on Friday nights. I did it with my own savings, a business loan I paid off early, and enough 18-hour days that I stopped counting them. My husband Arjun's older brother, Vikram, joined as a minority partner 4 years in, contributing capital for the second location in exchange for a documented 15% stake. 15%, nothing more. I kept that number in my head, the way other people keep anniversaries. The surgery wasn't planned far in advance. A gallstone attack sent me to the hospital on a Tuesday, and by Thursday I was under anesthesia for a laparoscopic removal that should have kept me out of the kitchen for 2 weeks, not 2 months. I asked Vikram, as the only other owner, to keep operations steady while I recovered. I trusted him with payroll access and vendor calls. I did not know that trust would be the crack he'd been waiting for. Looking back, there were signs I explained away in the weeks before. Vikram mentioning, a little too smoothly, that he'd been talking to a commercial real estate broker about future options for the second location. Our head chef, Marisol, telling me almost apologetically that Vikram had asked her to start referring to him as the owner when vendors called. A change of signage estimate that showed up in our shared email, quietly, then vanished from the inbox an hour later. A text from Arjun's mother, sent to the family group chat and deleted within minutes, that only said, "Don't let Vikram handle the paperwork alone." I saw it before it disappeared. I never asked her about it directly. I told myself, family doesn't undermine family. And I had incisions still healing and antibiotics to track. I didn't have room to chase a feeling. 3 weeks into my recovery, I drove to the restaurant unannounced, still moving slowly, to check on the walk-in freezer repair. The locks had been changed. My key didn't turn. Through the front glass, I watched a locksmith hand a new set to Vikram, who was standing with a man I didn't recognize, gesturing at the dining room like he was already picturing it renovated. When I knocked, Vikram opened the door with an expression that had no guilt in it at all. "You should be resting," he said. "I'm handling things. You stepped back, remember? For your health." I had said no such thing. Not once, to anyone. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't concern dressed up as help. This was a plan, and it had been running for weeks while I was flat on my back, counting painkiller doses. Vikram introduced the stranger as a potential buyer for a majority stake in Saffron Table. A majority stake, from a man who held 15% on paper. I asked, calmly, what documents he was using to represent himself as majority owner. He told me not to make this complicated in front of a guest. I said nothing else. I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove straight to my accountant's office instead of home. I didn't raise my voice with Vikram again after that, not once in the following 10 days, and that restraint was deliberate. I've spent 8 years reading vendor contracts and lease agreements line by line, and I know that the person who reacts first usually loses the paper trail. So I went quiet instead, and I went to work. My accountant, Denise, pulled every filing connected to Saffron Table LLC, going back to its formation. What she found made my stomach drop through the floor. A restated operating agreement had been filed with the state 3 weeks earlier, listing Vikram as 60% owner, and me as 40. My signature was on page 4, notarized, dated the same week I was recovering from surgery, and hadn't left my house except for follow-up appointments. I called the notary's office listed on the form. The notary public confirmed she had stamped a document that week for a woman matching a general description, but she'd never verified identification beyond a driver's license Vikram had apparently supplied. I requested a copy of that license scan through my attorney. It wasn't mine. It was a fake, close enough to pass a rushed glance, but the birth date was off by 4 years, a detail Vikram had clearly guessed at rather than checked. I sat with that discovery for 2 full days before doing anything, because I needed to be certain I wasn't reacting out of anger alone. I gathered the original 2021 operating agreement, my actual notarized signature from that filing for comparison, the fraudulent restated agreement, the fake identification, bank statements showing every dollar of capital I'd personally put into both locations, and a sworn statement from Denise outlining the discrepancy. I built the file the way I'd build a due diligence packet for a lender, methodically, dated, indexed. Somewhere in that process, the shock in my hands turned into something colder and far more useful. While building that file, I also learned something Vikram hadn't accounted for. Marisol, the head chef, mentioned that Vikram had asked her twice to sign a statement confirming he'd been acting owner for the past year, backdating his authority well before the surgery. She'd refused both times and had kept a screenshot of the text asking her to do it, time-stamped and unedited. That single message told me exactly how far Vikram was willing to rewrite the last 4 years if nobody stopped him. I requested a family meeting myself, something I had never once initiated in 9 years of marriage into this family. I chose neutral ground, Arjun's parents' dining room, on a Sunday, framed simply as a conversation about the restaurant's future. Vikram arrived with the same real estate broker's business card, still in his jacket pocket, clearly expecting to negotiate a buyout. My mother-in-law sat at the head of the table, watching everyone with the careful stillness of someone who already sensed which way the room was about to turn. I didn't raise my voice. I laid the original 2021 agreement, the fraudulent restated filing, the fake ID scan, and the notary's written statement on the table, one document at a time. I watched Vikram's expression move from irritation to something much closer to panic as he realized his own mother was reading the same pages he was. "You filed a restated ownership agreement while I was recovering from surgery," I said, "with a forged signature and a fake identification. That's not a family disagreement. That's fraud against a business I built, and the state has already been notified." Arjun, sitting beside me, asked his brother quietly whether he'd actually believed no one would check the notary records. Vikram's silence answered before he could construct a defense. My father-in-law studied his tea, instead of meeting anyone's eyes. The restaurant's business insurer, once notified of a disputed ownership filing, froze the second location's operating account pending review, which meant Vikram lost access to funds he'd already been planning around. Within 2 weeks, under pressure from both the state's business filing division and a formal fraud complaint my attorney submitted, Vikram signed a corrected operating agreement restoring my ownership to its true structure and voluntarily forfeited his 15% stake as part of a settlement to avoid criminal referral. He returned the $11,000 he'd already drawn against the frozen account for legal fees related to the sale he never managed to complete. My mother-in-law never apologized outright, though she stopped asking me to let it go, for the family's sake, once the fraud complaint became a matter of public record rather than a private argument. Marisol stayed on as head chef, and I gave her the raise I'd been meaning to approve before all of this started. Saffron Table reopened both locations under my full, documented ownership within the month. I still work the long Friday shifts. I still taste every dish before it leaves the pass, but I check every filing now, every quarter, whether anyone asks me to or not, because I learned that trust without verification isn't loyalty, it's just an unlocked door. If you'd found a locksmith standing at your own front door, handing your keys to someone else while you were still healing, would you have confronted them on the spot, or waited quietly until you had the proof to end it for good?